Hey, this is Ken Gerhard, author of A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
This is Chris from Werewolves in Siberia. You're listening to one of the most awesome podcasts in the world. One of the most awesome podcasts in the world. One of the most awesome podcasts in the world. The Monster Guys podcast.
Been done over again, amen. You've gotta get some manners.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Monster Guys podcast. My name is DC McGann, and as always, I'm here with my partner and co-conspirator in all things creative, C. Michael McGannon. How you doing, Michael?
Good. We just finished a short marathon, I guess, of weird fiction and horror short films. So I'm hot off the heels of that.
Yeah, we did. That was interesting. Some of them were pretty good. Some of them were not so pretty good.
That seems to be, that genre seems to be hit or miss. So I like that genre a lot, but that is the case often.
Yeah, but there were some good films, and I always like seeing quality creative work from independent artists. So
yes,
very exciting to see some of those quality films.
Hey, some of those sets were actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, actually,
I'm
they
a little
were.
jealous.
I was thinking on some of those that maybe this guy's practicing to send up a demo reel or something to Hollywood.
I sure hope so. He's got some good work out there. That
Michael,
particular one does, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, we've got a jam-packed episode, a very special episode this time around. We had a big month in March, talked to a lot of great people, had some great conversations. April is going to be no different. It's just going to get bigger. You'll see why in just a couple of moments. We're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, but we've got two guests on the show today. Both of them are just stellar individuals and had a great time talking to them. One of them is going to help us with a worldwide premiere of something right here on the Monster Guys podcast.
Something pretty fan-frickin-tastic.
What did you just say? Fan-freaking-tastic?
Fan-frickin-tastic, yes.
Okay, well...
I'm excited about this part.
Yeah. Before we get into that, a couple of announcements. First of all, thank you to those of you who gave us 5-star reviews on iTunes. After my rant last month about working so hard for reviews, it was in good fun, but some of you responded, and you know what? We really appreciate that. It has made a huge difference in just the past month. We really appreciate it. Let me give you a couple of ideas. This one is from Mothman 46. By the way, if you go to our iTunes subscription page, punch in a review there, you can see the other reviews sitting there. It says, Michael and DC have one of the best podcasts out there. I was pretty excited about that statement.
That is exciting, yeah.
Yeah, even though I fussed and hemmed and hawed for it, that was an exciting statement to hear. He goes on to say, thoroughly enjoying mix of info and witty banter. I love this podcast. Well, Mothman 46, I love you.
And I have to say, Mothman 46, your name is relevant to tonight.
It absolutely is. You're going to love this show.
So this one's for you.
Yeah, this one's for you.
Just for you, nobody else.
But thank you so much for that review. It means a lot. Here's another one. Awesome show about monsters by zombies everywhere. I love that name too. Maybe we'll have to do a zombie episode soon.
Yes.
Says everything about this show is fun. I like that. Each episode, these guys take a look at a specific monster and go into the folklore and reported sightings of these creatures. He said the monster guys feed well off of each other. I do not feed on you, Michael.
I was going to say, it makes it sound like we're
This guy, his name is Zombies Everywhere, and he talks about feeding off of each other. Okay, as well as their guests. Well, that's why you never hear from our guests on any other show after you hear them on the Monster Guys podcast.
No repeat guests.
Yeah. So obviously love what they're doing. We do love what we're doing. This is a lot of fun. This makes for a great listen. You can decide for yourself whether or not you believe in these monsters, and that's true. We've said it before, I'll say it again. We try to raise the questions, have great conversation, and let you take it from there. Either way, these guys don't try to push you one way or the other. With their respectful approach to each legend and story, they keep getting better, and they've been getting some great guests. Give them a try. I will agree, we are getting better sometimes, but we do have some really great guests.
Yeah, we do.
This year has been just top shelf. Every month, I think, with very knowledgeable and very personable and very kind people.
Yeah, super down to earth.
Super down to earth. You know that's a contradiction in terms. What you
Well,
just
you know
said
what I
there.
mean. They're not all up there trying to get crazy amounts of attention and stuff.
Right.
They come to tell a point, and they come to have discussions, and it's nice. It's refreshing.
Yeah, and you know what? I think because most of them are just telling the stories of the people that they are spending time with. And I think that's important. And I think that's where the real knowledge, and especially in the field of folklore, comes from, is spending time with the people.
And I think everybody that we've spoken to this season could be described as a modern-day folklorist, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think about Lyle Blackburn, author of Beyond Boggy Creek, In Search of the Southern Sasquatch, and his work with Seth Breedlove, with Small Town Monsters, their film, award-winning film, I should say, Boggy Creek Monster, the documentary. These guys are telling stories, and they're not just telling their stories or tooting their horns. They're going out there and spending time with people and doing the hard work. It shows. It shows in how much they care, not just about the people, but about telling that story the right way.
Yeah, and the reason I say modern-day folklorists, if to put it in perspective, I mean, this is what Grim Fairy Tales did, this is what people like W.B. Yeats did, and Lafcadio O'Hearn. They actually went door to door, and they spoke with people about, what they had experienced.
Yeah.
So these are literally the modern-day Brothers Grimm.
Right, modern-day storytellers, folklorists, and we're very proud to have had them on our show, and this month is going to be no different. You'll see in just a few minutes. Also, coming up in just a couple of months, I think I mentioned it in the midst of our interview tonight, that we're actually going to have Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters and Lyle Blackburn back on the show later this year as soon as they release their brand new film, Mothman of Point Pleasant.
So we didn't feed on them, so we will have repeat guests.
So we did not actually feed on them, and they will be back, at least in part. We'll see. Michael, some other cool news happening with us before we get to this worldwide premiere is that we just recently joined the Folklore Thursday team, which is, to me, super exciting.
Oh, yes, very.
We have been interacting and building a relationship with the folks over at Folklore Thursday for, I don't know, maybe a year or better. We've been spending time with them. And if you don't know what this is, it's a group out of the UK, and every Thursday they meet together on Twitter. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, I'm not sure exactly, but a lot of people share folklore stories, tidbits, anecdotes, pictures, books, all kinds of stuff about folklore from all over the world. So this is right up our alley.
Yeah, it really is. And they've got, when you say all of those things, they're quality. They're top-notch. They're not just something that you would find, on the first page of Google, as I've said in previous shows. It's pretty in-depth.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some of this stuff is coming from university-level people, professional folklorists, storytellers from all over the world, and people like us who are just in love with storytelling, with folklore, and try to approach it with a great deal of respect and bring that to the public again. So we've joined their team. So what that means is basically you'll find us on Thursdays hanging out with them anyway. Now we're actually going to be help moderating and sharing the bits and pieces that come through from the group through Twitter. They also have a wonderful website. Go check it out, folklorethursday.com. You can find out all about them, what they do and when they broadcast, and the various places they've been seen. They've been featured, I think, on BBC Trending or something recently. You can find just a wealth of articles from people all over the world about various aspects of folklore. We'll be providing not just an article, but also a podcast in just a couple of months dedicated to the folks at Folklore Thursday. So we're very excited about that. That's just a piece of what we're doing here each and every week, trying to reach out to a larger community, serve that community, and help get the word out about great stories and monsters from all over the world.
So we're both pretty excited about that. It'll be a bit early in the morning for us, just so we can match the time difference. But I think you and I will probably be carrying on throughout the rest of the day with that as well, for those of us on this side of the pond.
Yeah, definitely. I think we start our session like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, which over there is like lunchtime.
Yeah.
So we're going to be slobbering over ourselves that early in the morning while somebody over there is having a cup of tea or...
But, and I know our listenership has groups all over the world.
Yeah.
We have a lot of friends in the UK. We have a lot of friends in Ireland. We have friends over in Australia and different listeners there. For those of us in the US, I think we could help bolster the latter half of the day for that Folklore Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Go to Twitter, follow them at Folklore Thursday, and check out their website, folklorethursday.com. And on Thursdays, chime in at the hashtag Folklore Thursday. It's just a great place to be. If you want to learn, or if you just want to sit and just absorb a lot of really cool information, that's the place to be. And you'll be hanging out with us as well. Also, this month, Michael, we're extra busy on the publishing side of our world. We have the 4th book in our young adult series, Charlie Sullivan and the Monster Hunters. That'll be hitting the shelves in, I think, just under 3 weeks.
Yeah, the 3rd Tuesday of this month, I believe.
Yep. Book 4, it's titled The Dragon Gate. Charlie Sullivan and the gang traveled to Japan. Then from there, they're spread out all over the world in this book, literally.
Yeah, and events take well, I guess I can't say what turn they take.
Yeah.
But
be careful.
Fans have been waiting for, 3 years now for this book? So
3 years for this book.
It's been a long time coming.
Thank you for your patience. Those of you who are on this show that read our books, especially in that series, it's been a long time coming, and I hope you'll feel rewarded at the end of this book. I know our early readers on this have come back with high praise. We are super excited about this book. We're super exhausted about it as well. But it's going to be, I think, a wonderful addition to the saga, and then there'll be 2 more books after that. That'll wrap this series. And this is the series that we began writing together. This began our writing career effectively as fiction writers.
Yeah, this is our flagship.
It is. So in addition to other publishing, we've got another yokai folklore book coming out. We've got a fairy tales, more European and North American fairy tales book that'll be out in just a couple of months. Our horror collection, short stories, is being broken apart, individual stories, and prepped for a couple of different avenues for how those stories are going to be told.
And possibly some new forms of media.
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I can't give it all away right now, Michael. And then, of course, we've got a new series that'll be starting in the summer. Or actually, I say starting in the summer. You and I will actually have finished it by then, and then I think it'll launch at the end of summer. But it'll be more of an adult...
thriller of sorts.
Thriller, but set futuristically. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty dark, a little bit bloody, but
a little bit.
it'll be an exciting addition to our fold. So we've got a lot of stuff going on with our books, and we just hope you guys check those out. I'll leave some links in the show notes if you want to check those out as well. We have this month also some exclusive content from one of our guests tonight. Actually, both of our guests tonight. We've been able to get some exclusive content, so I'll leave, again, the information in the show notes about that. Please check that out, because if you want to go deeper and a little bit further with our talks with them, that's the way to do it, and we're excited to provide that. Now, last month, Michael, we spoke about infrasound. If you check out, if you check out episode 33.5 at the end of last month, our episode interviewing Richard Martin from Ireland, we also spoke of infrasound. We have not stopped that conversation. And tonight's conversation about flying humanoids has not ended either with the interview that you'll hear a little bit later. We've had some great conversation just between you and me. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to compile that conversation together and continue it in another piece later this month. So if you want to go deeper, because in the conversation about infrasound, I know that you and I both forgot to talk about a couple of very important points in our research about that topic, and we want to bring that to the table for listeners who want to go deeper with that episode. That episode actually has been one of the more popular episodes to hit in the last couple of months. So we want to continue that conversation. We're going to do that in addition to a continuing conversation about tonight's main topic in a shorter, more intimate conversation that we'll release probably later this month.
Yeah, and on the infrasound note, there's so much out there, and I think you've said it, I think you did say it in the last episode, that it hasn't been studied enough, or that people don't give it enough attention, and we did delve into some of the scientific studies that have been done a little bit in our pre-show talk, and then we forgot to include that, so
yeah.
For those of you that enjoy the more sciencey stuff that we talk about, we'll have some more in that exclusive content.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so Michael, right now, let's get into our worldwide premiere.
Is it time?
It's time, because here's the exciting news. We have a guest on the show tonight, Chris Cavoretto from Werewolves in Siberia, who has written an original theme song for the Monster Guys podcast. Did you hear what I just said?
I did.
An original theme song for the Monster Guys podcast.
I've been withholding my glee for, I think, over a month now.
Yeah.
So
This is so exciting for us, and I'm actually going to call it the original Dark Synth theme song for the Monster Guys podcast right now, because you, the listener, you're actually going to help us choose the title for the song. We have come up with 3 potential titles for this song, and we're going to list them out, and after you hear the song in just a few minutes, we're going to tell you how to go vote on those titles so that you can help us choose the official title for this song. We wanted you to be a part of this and have a little interaction with you and a conversation with you about the song. But Chris stepped up in a big way. He is a dark synth or a horror synth artist. If you listen to his music, you can kind of be taken to a John Carpenter-ish type atmosphere, 1980s movie type thing.
Stranger Things.
Yeah, and he was inspired by the podcast and by some of our topics, came up with an idea. That idea drove the theme of this song, and before you know it, he messaged me and said, I've got the song. And it's pretty, what did you say earlier? Pretty fan-freaking-tastic.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So it is really cool. We're going to take you in just a moment. We're going to speak with Chris for a few minutes about the song and about his inspiration, and then we're going to play the song in its entirety. We're going to come back, tell you how to vote on it, and then we're going to speak with our main guest tonight, Ken Gerhard, author, cryptozoologist, world-renowned, just a master in his field. We're going to talk to him about flying humanoids and some other mysterious beasts from around the world. So this is a very exciting episode for both of us, and I hope it is for everybody that's listening. Right now, Michael, let's flip over and talk with Chris for a few minutes about the brand new original Dark Synth theme song for the Monster Guys podcast.
Let's do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have Chris Cavoretto with Werewolves in Siberia, the horror synth artist, on our show tonight, and we have a very special thing that we're doing with him on the podcast tonight. This is the global debut of the Monster Guys theme song that Chris wrote for us. It's going to be the original Dark Synth Monster Guys podcast theme song. That's not the official title. We're going to get to that in just a moment, but we are going to play the full song, and we're going to give you an opportunity to help us choose the official title for the song. But Chris is on the show with us today, and just super excited to have him. In my opinion, just a tremendous artist, prolific, very talented, and some just uber cool. Can I use that word, Michael? Uber cool?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Super cool, totally awesome music. If you want to pretend that you're sitting in front of a John Carpenter movie without watching one, just turn all the lights off and get all the spooky feeling, do that listening to Werewolves in Siberia. It is a phenomenal experience. And by the way, Michael, I've been using Werewolves in Siberia as writing music these days. So
definitely, it's good music for that.
Yeah, it's awesome music for writing. So we have Chris now with us. Chris, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Good, thanks. It's great to have you on the Monster Guys podcast.
Great to be here.
Chris, you stepped forward in a big way for us here on the Monster Guys podcast and wrote this song. We're going to play it in just a couple of minutes, but we want to get some insight from you first before this global reveal. I feel like I should be like at the MTV studios in New York, standing out, looking out that window in Times Square and, and announcing this song to this massive crowd, like Lincoln Park used to do or something.
Cutting some red ribbon.
Right. You don't cut ribbons for songs, Michael.
I don't know.
All right, whatever. So, Chris, you really came through. This was, and you did it so fast. I was telling you earlier that I don't know how you're just so prolific, so talented. You come up with this theme and this inspiration, and it just flows out of you. And it was like almost overnight. You were just like, I got it. And when I listened to it, I was just blown away. So let me step back a minute and ask you to tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about Werewolves in Siberia and how that started.
Well, I guess about 14 is when I started playing music. I'd always played in metal bands, and that evolved into hardcore bands and then punk bands and stuff like that. And then as I got older, that drive to be in a band and deal with everybody else's schedules and all that kind of, started getting irritating more than fun. So I'm married, have a daughter, I guess it's just one of those things. As you start getting older, you start kind of going off and doing other things. And yeah, this was something that I could do myself. I don't have to worry about anybody else. I can just kind of do my own thing. I can go off on a different style if I want. I don't have anybody complaining to me about it, So that's kind of how this whole thing got started. It was a one-man project, really. Yeah, I guess the horror thing came from just because ever since I was a little kid, I liked all the horror movies and everything. And when I first heard the band Zombie, I was blown away, and I was like, someday I'm going to do something like this. So when I started this band, I was like, okay, this is going to be my zombie-inspired band, and I hope I don't sound like I'm ripping them off too much.
I wouldn't say so. I think it sounds very unique. And DC, I think a couple months ago at this point, sent me a text one night while I was at work, and he said, I've got 2 bands for you to check out. And the first one, he said, Werewolves in Siberia, and I played it, and I pretty much just left it on for the rest of the night because I enjoyed it so much.
Oh, cool. Good to hear.
I have to ask, I'm a very visual person. I know a lot of our readers and listeners out there would be as well. So when I listen to your music, when I listened to the anthem you wrote, I was walking through a hallway at work, and when it hit the crescendo, I immediately felt like I was a character in an 80s horror movie, and I felt like Freddy Krueger or Jason or something was about to pop out the ceiling and grab me. Do you visualize when you work, or how do you build such great music that seems to evoke that scene?
Sometimes I've got a scene in my head, that I kind of have the idea, and I just look for the right sounds to kind of start with, to grab that feeling. I just kind of start building from there. And other times I'm just messing around and messing with different synths and seeing what sounds cool with which synth and all that. And from there, I just kind of start building, and then a scene will kind of come to me as I'm working on it. And a lot of times that's how I'll get a title for a song, just in that zone, and I start seeing the whole thing unfold in my head. So it's very visual as far as what's going on in my head.
It's pretty awesome, and it comes off seamlessly.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it really does. And you mentioned Zombie as an inspiration. I know that your music has been kind of described as a throwback to that 80s horror, John Carpenter horror movie era. It's described as horror synth. Are there any other musical inspirations or film inspirations that you would cite that you kind of say, man, this really moves me and this really inspires me when I'm doing music?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much a lot of that 80s horror stuff is a big influence. I mean, John Carpenter's a huge one, so I think that definitely comes through. And then Fabio Frizzi, that scored Zombie Flesh Eaters and a bunch of the Fulci movies, especially early on. I think I was listening to a lot of his scores, and that was kind of coming through a lot, I think. But then as I started doing this whole project, it really just seemed like when I would watch a horror movie, I would really listen to the music, and I started collecting more of the scores and listening to what all these composers are doing and kind of, I guess, without trying to rip anybody off, just kind of taking it all in and hearing what they're doing with it. I think I started paying a lot more attention to what all those composers were doing after I started this project.
That's very cool. What inspired the name Werewolves in Siberia? That's just such a interesting name for a band.
I was just kind of hanging out. I watched that show, Destination Truth, on Sci-Fi a lot. I was just kind of hanging out. I was always trying to think of band names for my next band. What could it be called or whatever? And so I was watching Destination Truth, and Josh Gates, the host, at one point he was searching for a Yeti in Siberia. And then there was another one where he's looking for a lobezon in Mexico. And so I'm just kind of taking all these things in, and I was trying to think of different names. Like every once in a while something just pops in my head, and I was trying to think of like lobezones in Siberia. That could be cool, but it doesn't really have a good ring to it. And I was like, but werewolves in Siberia does. And so that's kind of just where it came from.
Yeah, I kept rolling through my head, the last couple of weeks. Where did that name? Because, something like werewolves in Nantucket wouldn't work either, or Chupacabras in San Bernardino.
It's not horror, but Siberian almost makes me think of like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra as well. So it kind of has that, again, that rockish theme sound to it.
I'm sitting here looking at Michael. By the way, our shirts came in last night. Thank you so much for those.
Awesome.
I'm sitting here. Michael's wearing his right now. I took a picture of it. I'm going to post it later. Listeners, if you guys want some just really cool shirts, you got to check this out. Go get you some of this gear from Werewolves in Siberia. Let's talk about the song before we debut this on a global scale. MTV's going to worldwide. MTV's going to pick us up. We're going to be on every radio station. I'm sure of it. I'm sure. I've got big dreams, big visions. Give me some thought process as to your inspiration for this particular song. Kind of take us through what you were feeling, what you were thinking, and how this came out.
Basically, I'd listened to several of your guys' shows and all the talk of all these different monsters kind of inspires this. It's pretty much, to me, like making a song for a movie, only it was hard to kind of grasp one monster since you guys cover so many. So I just kind of messed around for a little bit and then found a good starting point with a good kind of dirty synth sound, and it had kind of an ominous sound to it. From there, I just kind of started building and tried not to have any one monster in mind. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger than just one. It definitely started bringing to mind more one or two different monsters. That's pretty much what it was, is just kind of doing what I always do, starting to let a scene unfold in my head, and you have the creature sort of lurking, watching and waiting for its chance to attack. So that's pretty much what inspired that one.
Yeah, because when I was listening to it, I think that dirty synth sound that you kind of speak of that was your starting point, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm thinking of the same one, it almost sounds to me like a growl in the beginning of the song that just kind of sets the mood and sets the tone, and everything builds from there to where you feel like you just feel like you're being captured. You're being surrounded by this darkness, this creature that is coming through the sound. I don't know, but that's kind of the feeling I got, Michael. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely did. Like I said, I envisioned walking down a hall. I mean, I was walking.
You were walking down a hallway.
It was
so real.
It was starkly lit, so it wasn't quite white, but the light, the way they shone on it, it kind of felt like a white hallway with that darkness from the different doorways and stuff kind of creeping in. So I literally stopped and started looking at myself and like a third person perspective as I was walking, and I felt like something was gonna sneak up behind me. And as you're talking about that, I could definitely envision that same scene of somebody walking along and you just have, one, then two, then three things start to stalk him. So it definitely looks that unsettling, on the edge of your seat, something's about to hit the fan and something's about to go down.
So Chris, what we're going to do, and for the sake of our listeners, I'll say this, after the song, stay tuned, because we're going to tell you 3 potential titles for this song that we've come up with. And then we're going to ask you, like I said before, we're going to ask you, the listener, to go vote on those titles and help us choose the title for the official Dark Synth theme song of the Monster Guys podcast. So we're going to play the song in just a moment, let you enjoy that, and then I'd love for you to go vote on that and help us choose the official title. As much as you can, Chris, without having a title. I don't know how you're going to do this. I'm putting you on the spot. But can you introduce the song, and then we're going to go right into it?
Yeah, you put me on the spot.
Keep in mind, this is global domination level stuff here, and all 4.5 of our fans are going to listen to this at one time. So, so it's all you. Introduce this song as much as you can without a title, and let's enjoy it.
Okay, turn down the lights. Imagine you're outside, walking through the woods. You hear a crack in the bushes. What is it?
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. New theme song for the Monster Guys podcast. Very excited about that.
I don't have enough words to say how much I love this song. I actually I went on a date with my girlfriend this past week, and driving over to see her and then driving back home, I played that song on repeat probably more times than I should admit.
Yeah, we've listened to it over and over again. And here's the thing, not just a quality song, but that it was done for this show.
Yeah.
And it was inspired by this show.
Inspired by the show, and I feel like, I don't know, man, I we talked about the different things that we saw and felt when we listened to the track, but I still, every once in a while when I hear that beginning riff or the opening notes, I feel like I can see like a Monster Guys TV show in my head, and I can see the title screen, almost like you would see X-Files going.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris from Werewolves in Siberia, for that awesome song. Now, it doesn't have a title yet. We've got potential titles, but we need your help. Vote for the title that you want. Here's how you do that. Go to our website, themonsterguys.com, and there'll be a poll there where you can choose which one of those titles you like. Or you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/themonsterguys, and there'll be a place there that you can vote. Or just message us there or post there which song title you like. We'll pin a post to the top of the page with the titles and everything that we have potentially in play. Also, you can go to our Twitter, twitter.com/themonsterguys, and we'll have a poll pinned there with the titles. Choose which one you like the most. Now, if for some crazy reason you don't like any of those, well, send us a message. It will be considered. And if enough people chime in on that, maybe we'll have another title option. But there's 3 options there, and we want you to help us choose which one to officially tag this song with. So, fair enough?
I think that's fair.
All right, help us choose the title for this song. We appreciate it. Michael, let's get to our main interview for this month. Ken Gerhard, author, TV personality. He's been literally all over the world. History Channel, I think Discovery Channel, I think Destination America, I think all those places he's been, coast to coast. He's the author of 4 different books that we'll talk about more in depth during the interview. He is a world-renowned cryptozoologist and really just an all-around fantastic individual. I really had a lot of fun talking to him. Again, another top-shelf individual that I think is just really down-to-earth and real and a nice guy. And I'm glad we're getting so many nice people on this show.
It's been pretty nice.
It has. Thank you for your pun.
And he's brought up some interesting points in this talk. And again, I can't wait to delve further into these subjects in the future.
So tonight we talk flying humanoids, we talk giant flying reptiles, we talk science, we talk folklore, we talk about a lot with Ken. And we're excited for you to be here and be a part of that. So right now, let's transition over to our conversation with Ken. And after that, if you would, please go to iTunes, drop us a review, and then go to one of those 3 places. Tell us which title we should use for our brand new song. Today's guest is a very special guest, especially in the world of monsters and cryptozoology. We have with us Mr. Ken Gerhard, a cryptozoologist, an expert in all things our topic this evening, flying humanoids. Ken, how are you doing today? Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast.
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me to come on your show. It's an honor to be here with you and all of your wonderful listeners.
It's certainly our privilege. Thanks for taking the time with us. I know you're extremely busy. Seems like you're literally all over the world. You're writing books. You're chasing down monsters. You're doing TV and radio, lectures, if I'm not mistaken, even more recently, some lectures at universities. Is that right?
Not too many, maybe 1 or 2 here or there. Not as many as I would hope.
Yeah, really. Well, that's 1 or 2 more than I'm doing this year.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, if you would, take a moment and
tell us a little bit about yourself. We'd like to get to know you a little bit better, our listeners to get to know you. What can you share with us about Ken Gerhard and your works and your activities in the field of cryptozoology?
Well, I feel honored to be a widely recognized cryptozoologist, which essentially is a technical term meaning the study or search for hidden animals, species that haven't been discovered yet. Of course, many people romanticize what I do and do call me a monster hunter because some of these undocumented species that we search for are things like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, all kinds of fabulous beasts. And it's just been a lifelong passion of mine. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I watched a TV show about Bigfoot, and I was completely hooked. Had to read every book on the subject, and as I was growing up, I was very fortunate because my mother, in particular, was very supportive of my interests. She was a big influence on me, very adventurous world traveler. Everywhere we went together, and she took me to all kinds of amazing places around the world, including the Amazon jungle and Australian outback and Asia, Africa, places like that. I was always learning about legendary creatures because you have them in every culture worldwide. So, age 15, my family vacationed at Loch Ness, which of course is the infamous home of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster there in Scotland. And that was my first attempt of doing field research, interviewing people around the lake who'd seen it, hiking around with a little movie camera, hoping to get some type of evidence. And so that's kind of the beginning of my journey. I was a musician for many years and kind of got off track as far as cryptozoology goes. I never imagined I could, make it a full-time pursuit, but, many years ago I got back into it and began doing field research, looking for Bigfoot here in North America, among other things. And I've been very, very blessed and fortunate to have appeared on several television shows, hosted a television show, and as you mentioned, I've written books and I do lectures, so I have a blast.
That's all very cool. What an exciting route to take with your life. On the lighter side, can I just ask you, is it true, because I'm very interested in chupacabras, is it true that chupacabras perhaps are really Boston Terriers dressed up as vampires?
Perhaps not too far off the mark. There's a lot of misinformation and misperception out there about some of the things that we deal with, and one of them is with regard to the legendary Chupacabra, which is a Latin American phenom. The name Chupacabra means goat sucker, so yes, the name originates from a belief that these creatures, whatever they are blood-drinking vampire-like creatures that stalk the night. There has been a lot of evidence in recent years that perhaps we use the name too liberally, and Chupacabra has also been used to describe animals that have been found here in Texas where I live that have been DNA tested and examined, and those animals turned out to be really grotesque-looking canids or dogs, wild dogs, and no evidence that those animals were drinking blood or anything of the like. But, I often point out to people now that the name Chupacabra in Latin America, throughout Mexico, Central South America, and so forth, and even here in Texas, has become kind of a catch-all word that basically means boogeyman or vampire or monster. So I think oftentimes people use that term very liberally. But there is allegedly a vampire-like creature out there from the island nation of Puerto Rico going back to the 1990s that does drink blood, and that's where the name originated.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You try to make a joke, and Ken Gerhard makes it academic on you. That's what I get for trying to be funny.
Which we appreciate on the show.
Yeah, we appreciate. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we do take our topics seriously. So I say that because I once had a Boston Terrier, and I was pretty sure he was a vampire. So.
Oh, okay. Well, anything is possible, guys.
Yeah. Ken, you are the author of several books, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit more and have those accessible to our listeners. Some of the titles that you have, Monsters of Texas, that you wrote with Nick Redfern, and another just stunning individual in this field that is very important in the field of cryptozoology and what we call monsters or creatures around here. You have a book which I have a huge fascination with, called Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. And I believe those were two of your earlier books, if I'm not mistaken. And now you have Encounters with Flying Humanoids, which we'll be talking about more on today's show. And I think your most recent book is A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts. Is that correct?
Yes, that's very good. I appreciate the kind words, and that's where we're at so far.
Ken, let's step back for a moment. Let's talk flying humanoids. These entities or creatures, to some, may seem to be some of the more fantastic creatures in the world of cryptids or legends or monsters, but people are having very real experiences with them. And in my belief, I feel like we're about to have a lot more very down-to-earth conversations about flying humanoids in the very near future. The scope of this topic can range anywhere from the Mothman to a Batman in Texas that I believe you write about, to aliens to ancient gods in Mexico. Can you define for us what are flying humanoids, and tell us about some of the ones that you've researched and the ones that we need to be aware of?
Well, flying humanoids, as the name would imply, are essentially humanoid beings possessing the features of a human, but with wings, essentially flying through the air. Now, this is kind of something that we refer to in my field as a zooform, not a true cryptid, not a flesh and blood, or presumably not a flesh and blood thing like Bigfoot, because, we're talking about an evolutionary impossibility. Humanoids were never at a stage of evolution where we would have radiated or taken to the air. There's nothing in the animal kingdom that really looks like a flying humanoid. But as you mentioned, many, many people have had sightings and encounters, quite terrifying encounters, with something. And the most famous of these creatures is known as the Mothman, which has been reported in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, going back to 1966. Probably one of the most enigmatic features in the annals of the unexplained. Basically, a man-like figure standing over 6 feet tall with immense wings attached to its body, giant red glowing eyes, and many people claimed that they were chased by the Mothman at speeds of 100 miles an hour in their cars. And so it's a pretty complex mystery, but things like Mothman have been reported around the world. In England, there's something known as the Owl Man from southern England and Cornwall that is a little bit different from Mothman in terms of physical description. As the name would imply, something with kind of a feathery or hair-like covering on its body with an owl-like appearance, but again, big red burning eyes. That's kind of a common theme that we come across. As you mentioned, in Houston, Texas, where I lived for many years, there was a figure known as the Houston Batman that was seen by 3 witnesses back in 1953, and that was a large man-like figure standing on the branch of a large tree, and he had wings and glowed. There's something called the Bat Squatch that's been reported in Washington State, kind of a play on Sasquatch, since they have sightings that was up there too.
Wow.
Briggs Roadman Bat from Wisconsin, flying man-like beings in Mexico, and all over the world, really. So, it seems to be a global phenomenon, even though Mothman is the most famous of those. But essentially, I was investigating flying creatures like Thunderbirds for many years, and then, of course, I've been fascinated with Mothman my whole life, like some of these other things that I've investigated, but I never really looked into the matter. And then several years ago, my publisher asked me to write a book on the subject, and around that same time period, I did a couple of television shows where I was able to investigate some of these flying humanoids, and it is a really bizarre and completely mind-boggling mystery.
Based on your research, if you can speak to this, and maybe you can, and you can just tell me shove off, because I don't know, but I found you to be a very honest person in listening and to you and reading some of your material. What do you think these flying humanoids are? What do you think that people are really experiencing with these various things like the Mothman, like you said, and other similar entities?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And really, most of my field revolves around speculation, because that's typically all we can do with the little bit of evidence that we have. But after many years of research, the only thing I'm fairly sure of is that these things, whatever they are not flesh and blood, at least not in the way that we know. I don't believe that they evolved on our planet in a natural way. They seem to appear and disappear at will, to move at impossible speeds, and to scare the living bejesus out of people. But they've been with us for a very long time, as evidenced by traditions around the globe. We have legends of flying humanoids dating back thousands of years. So many people think that they are extraterrestrial in origin. If you adhere to many of the theories of ancient aliens and visitors from other planets or dimensions or wherever, some people that are more religious and spiritual view them as demonic, or at least that's what they call them. I think, from my perspective, they are spectral or supernatural, paranormal in nature, manifestations of energy, and that they are somehow materialize or manifest in these random places, either because of us as humans, that they're somehow connected to us in our subconscious level, or, perhaps they are truly from another realm or dimension that we don't see or sense on a regular basis, and that they appear in our reality kind of at the time and place of their choosing.
Just a few moments ago, you brought up the term zooform. And I've seen that term thrown around a little bit by different people with different connotations, some of them negative, some of them positive, some of them describing things like you were talking about flesh and blood creatures, some of them describing a whole nother category. Can you help us define that term zooform and how that applies to us with regards to flying humanoids?
Yes, a great question. So within the field of cryptozoology, the topics that we investigate are usually called cryptids. And within the field of cryptozoology, it is actually based on traditional zoology. So therefore, anything that is a cryptid or a hidden animal or hidden creature that could be biologically viable would be something like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, Thunderbirds, things like that. Now, there are a host of other creatures that have been reported and described around the world that are biological and evolutionary impossibilities. That is, they don't fit into the paradigm of our fossil history. They don't make any sense from a biological standpoint. And we refer to those as zooforms. They're really, really weird. Although they have animal-like characteristics, hence the word zoo. And the zooforms, I think, would refer to things like Mothman, Dogman, or werewolves, mermaids, something called the goat man. So, the things like that combine the features of humanoids and, with other animals, almost like mythological. But again, from a scientific perspective, those things don't make any sense. And as you might expect, in the case of zooforms, many people that have the encounters with them report them behaving in unnatural ways or having unnatural appearances, or oftentimes there is other residual phenomenon associated with them, paranormal activity, UFOs, and things like that.
For the sake of argument, because a lot of people would say what you're describing in terms of it just doesn't make sense, how does that not apply to something like, say, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Boggy Creek Monster? Do they not fall into that category where we would call them zooform as well?
No, they don't. And the main reason is because things that looked just like Bigfoot or the Boggy Creek Monster did exist thousands and millions of years ago. We know that definitively from fossils that have been found all over the old world, dating back, millions of years. You have the early hominins, the prehumans, Australopithecines, Gigantopithecus. So there were giant, almost intermediary, if you want to call it an ape man, but, evolutionarily speaking, between a man and an ape. Some of them were very large and robust, like Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Same thing with the Loch Ness Monster. People have described the Loch Ness Monster as looking like a prehistoric form, either a plesiosaur, which is an ancient marine reptile, or some kind of ancient whale called a zeuglodon. The Thunderbirds can be related to giant birds that lived in the fossil history. So the point being that cryptids, as remarkable as it sounds to people when we describe these things, they look just like things that actually did live in the past. So, they're completely biologically feasible, that these things could have evolved and could have survived an extended period of time and still be around.
Very good information, and I appreciate you clarifying that. One of the things we like to do, apart from entertain people, is educate on the Monster Guys podcast. And I think it's important that we have clear lines that we're talking about with regards to cryptids, flying humanoids, and the such. So I appreciate you taking time to clarify that. The Mothman, I'm going to go back to him for just a moment. A flying humanoid that many people are going to be somewhat familiar with, like you said earlier, probably one of the most popular figures within this scope of conversation. What can you tell us briefly about that phenomenon, and why is that so important to this field of research?
Well, as I stated, Mothman is one of the most enigmatic figures in the annals of the unexplained. He's basically a gray, man-like creature, again, standing over 6 feet tall, immense wings. Mothman really is the quintessential monster. I mean, the physical description makes it seem like it stepped right out of a science fiction movie, right? Most eyewitnesses have described it as having a low-slung head with these 2 enormous eyes like giant blood-red embers. And those eyes allegedly have a hypnotic effect on people, putting them into a kind of trance. People have claimed to have been chased by Mothman, terrorized by Mothman, haunted by Mothman. His sole purpose seems to be to absolutely terrify us. And there were literally dozens of Mothman sightings around the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia during the 60s, 67, 66. The incidents were well documented by local newspapers, as well as author John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, and that later became a movie, of course. The case is so intricately complex and multifaceted. I mean, you have elements of UFO sightings, mysterious men in black that would intimidate eyewitnesses. There are conspiracies. There are allegations of animal mutilations, poltergeist activity. Some of the eyewitnesses claim they developed psychic abilities. And then ultimately there was a tragic bridge collapse. The Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967, resulting in 46 deaths. And a lot of people in that area associate that tragedy with the Mothman because of the time frame and all those things happening around the same time period. So it's a fascinating monster story, probably one of the best modern legends we have here in the United States. But moreover, people are really fascinated by it. And, in fact, they do a Mothman festival there in Point Pleasant every year. And this past year, on the 50th anniversary of the Mothman, there were 10,000 people that showed up. So,
wow, that's impressive.
Mothman is extremely popular.
Yeah, and as a point of interest for our listeners, last month we had Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters Film Company on the show talking about some of his previous films. He and Lyle Blackburn have just finished up, or are finishing up, their next film together, The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Point of interest, so everybody's looking forward to this. We're actually having Seth and Lyle back on the show in June, just literally, I think, a day after that new movie releases, to talk about The Mothman of Point Pleasant and the stories and the filming experience there in that area. So we're very excited to have Seth and Lyle back on the show to talk about Mothman in the near future.
Ken, you did mention something about the Mothman that I would like to bring up later on about how he seems to be here just to terrify us. But to take it a step back and go back in history a bit, I remember watching a lecture you had done, I believe, with the UFO and Paranormal Research Society, I believe it was. And you had talked about one of the earliest cases that we know of a bird-like humanoid, or a flying humanoid, being this cave drawing of a birdman, so to speak. And you talked about how that was kind of a very difficult location to get to. But it was a Native American cave drawing, if I remember correctly. And I don't remember seeing wings on that creature, but I remember the bird head. Could you tell us a little bit more about that specific creature to go back in time a bit?
Oh, yeah. So the conceptual synthesis of both human and avian characteristics dates back over 17,000 years. So according to carbon dating, that is the age of cave paintings at the famous Lascaux caves in France. In one particular image known as the Birdman of Lascaux, and essentially it's a human-like form with the head of a bird. And so 17,000 years ago, humans were visualizing this bird-human synthesis. Now, other anthropomorphic birdmen appear in engravings and bas-reliefs starting around 900 BC. So, for example, the ancient Sumerians worshipped something known as the Abkalu or Abgal, essentially winged humanoids or demigods. So those did have wings. And then you have Pazuzu, the Assyrian king of wind demons, typically characterized as a human form with 2 wings. And then, it goes on and on through history. The Harpies in Greek mythology, the Furies of Roman mythology. In Hindu and Buddhist culture, we have something called Garuda, a giant man-like figure with wings. From Japanese folklore, the Tengu. And even here in the Americas, things like Camazotz, the death bat. So, you have many examples from diverse cultures all over the world indicating some type of familiarity with these winged humanoid entities.
And I think in that same lecture, you had mentioned some of those creatures, and you had also talked about the Japanese Tengu, which is a favorite of ours here on the Monster Guys podcast and some of our story podcasts, and specifically a favorite of DC's.
Oh, yeah.
And I had never put two and two together until you had talked about the Tengu in your lecture that I watched. I think at the end of that lecture, there was a question that I've been thinking on through that entire time. And then at the end of that lecture, during a question and answer session, somebody actually asked you about the possibility of levitation. I know a lot of people will talk about the Mothman, and other flying humanoids having wings that are much too small to carry their weight. Some sightings or some of those events with the Mothman had talked about how people had seen the Mothman fly without ever flapping or using its wings. And as an interesting note, I hadn't thought about it until recently, the Tengu, it has many forms, but the humanoid figure that it takes, the humanoid form that it takes, those wings are said to be fake. And they actually don't use those wings to fly. They will fly around and they'll teleport, but they're not actually using those. It's an interesting connection between old folklore and modern-day sightings of creatures like the Mothman.
That's a great observation, actually. Very fascinating. Yeah, the Mothman was reported to take off straight off the ground without flapping its wings. And as you mentioned, the wing size, the proportion, the ratio, that's a great point. Not there. I mean, if Mothman was 6.5 feet tall, then I believe the wings would have to have been 36 feet across the wingspan in order for Mothman to be an efficient flyer, but people described it as having only a 10-foot wingspan, barely longer than the length of its body. So, again, these flying humanoids, they defy all of the laws and rules of biology and of Earth, of our planet, of physics. So, I mean, they evidently are taking on some type of spectral form. Perhaps you're right. Maybe it's a form of trickery. That was kind of how John Keel, the Mothman Prophecies author, kind of viewed this phenomenon as what he called the global trickster, a universal joker, if you will, something that is playing on our fears and forming into, some type of an apparition that we find utterly terrifying.
Well, and for the argument of science, and a little bit humorous here, let's consider the bumblebee. I mean, that little guy has got some pretty powerful wings for his body size. Perhaps he's one of the original flying humanoid type creatures. I don't know.
The bee-man, that's one, kind of think of it, that's the one flying humanoid I've never heard of, but I wonder if you could have a wasp or a bee-man out there somewhere. That would be pretty cool.
And as folklore goes, with the worldwide phenomenon of our bees dying off, we may have a bee-man rise to the occasion in the near future. Yeah, another point of interest for our listeners, if you want to hear a story about the Tengu, which describes him in great detail, and particularly the Japanese Dai Tengu, also incorporated in that historically a legendary swordsman and his family from Japan. Go back in some of our episodes of our Yokai podcast. You can find a story podcast about the Tengu. And later this month, tune in because, Ken, you mentioned the Owlman earlier from England. We'll actually have a story podcast about the Owlman on the Monster Guys podcast. So we're pretty excited. We're going to bring those to people in story form versus a discussion.
Awesome.
Just continuing on, the lines between folklore just as a pure form of storytelling and the reality that people are experiencing in these encounters often blur. You talked about the Japanese Tengu. I believe we've heard you talk about, and we've studied a little bit in the past, the Russian Alkanost and other associated Russian birdwomen. These all come to mind. Are we ever going to be able to clear up those blurry lines through research and science, or do you think we're always going to have to walk a little bit on the line of faith and the acceptable unknown with regards to these creatures? Where do we stand with all that? I feel like our world is becoming a little bit more accepting, a little bit more believing, but there's still an awful lot of faith and unknown involved with these entities. What's your opinion on that?
Well, at the risk of sounding cynical, I mean, I personally look at it like, as humans, we really don't know very much at all. I mean, our knowledge is very limited. Our perception of the world around us is very limited. I think we have a comfort zone in that we like to imagine or think that we have a pretty good grasp on everything at this point, considering all the amazing technology we have at our disposal. But science and discovery is an ongoing process, and the science books are constantly being rewritten as we formulate new theories, as new things are found and analyzed and, tested, and technology plays a part in that as well. So some of these enduring mysteries have been with us, as we mentioned, for hundreds or thousands of years. We may never have an answer to some of them, and I guess to some that might be a disconcerting thought. Not so much to me, because I feel comfortable in my nativity, I guess. So things like the Mothman, there's one interesting point about the flying humanoid thing, for example, is that it touches us on so many emotional and psychological levels. The fear of, and not to get too philosophical, but like the fear of a monster from above, something swooping down from the air and, clutching at us in its talons and then taking off.
Right.
There's probably an inherent fear, an instinctive fear that we have, that dates back millions of years ago to a time when our pre-human ancestors were in fact preyed on a regular basis by giant things with wings coming down from the air. But what's really fascinating, we could talk about the mythology and legends, and all that is fascinating, but what's really fascinating, guys, are the modern reports, right? I mean, I'm occasionally, maybe every few months, I'm being contacted by somebody who claims to have seen a flying humanoid, a Mothman-type creature. And, I typically interview these people, and I get to know them pretty well, and their stories are very poignant and profound. And people are experiencing something that is utterly beyond their comprehension. And I don't know if may not be a comforting thought to many of your listeners if they're afraid of the dark, but there undoubtedly are things out there that are real monsters.
And I would agree with you, and I would further touch on your sentiments that let's go back historically thousands of years and even into modern times and people's belief in angels and demons. You talked about demons earlier. I believe a lot of that plays into this topic as well, and what people are experiencing and what people may or may not believe to be true that's flying around in our air these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's on one hand it's bone chilling, but on the other hand it's if you have an open mind and you're not afraid of the unknown, and it's an utterly fascinating prospect.
On the topic of the fear itself and the feelings of unease and dread that some of these creatures seem to not just cause with their image, but they seem to actually weigh down on people, almost like a presence or almost like the effects of infrasound, if you will. A lot of people, as you stated earlier, believe that the Mothman was trying to warn them of the bridge, the Silver Bridge collapse. There was a similar story in Germany of a creature that was very much like the Mothman, a tall figure with leathery wings that appeared in front of a mine as a group of miners were going to work. It blocked them from going to work and stood there until they actually saw the mine explode. And according to them, they think that it was there as a warning to keep them from going into that place. If we dip back into folklore a little bit, creatures like the Alkanos, the Russian bird woman, and even the Tengu as well, again, they also have these prophetic moments, or these moments where they come before calamity or disaster. Have you noticed anything that seems to substantiate this as a reality, or is it just something perceived? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, there are a lot of vague accusations floating around out there for, with regard to that connection between Mothman and different calamities that have occurred within the past decades. 9/11, the Fukushima nuclear accident, Chernobyl. I've seen things online, or people have made inferences that Mothman was seen and this and that. But it's all very vague and kind of ambiguous when it comes to those stories.
I did actually see somebody research the Chernobyl event, and actually they got into the site, and I believe they were actually banned from coming back. But
really?
They did disprove that sighting.
Well, I think, so without better evidence, I feel more comfortable just kind of speculating that it's probably a cultural thing, and it may date back to some of these, these mythological flying humanoids that we talked about earlier. You mentioned one from Germany. Scotland, there was something called the Scree, or, in Ireland, the banshee, which was essentially a flying creature that was a warning. When it appeared, it was considered to be a warning. The Jersey Devil, same type of thing, kind of a flying gargoyle-like creature from New Jersey. People often associated that with cataclysmic events or tragedies. In many cultures, owls, we were talking about Owlman earlier, owls are viewed as a harbinger or bad omen in, for example, Spanish culture, that an owl appearing, or in Native American cultures even, an owl appearing in front of your window at night means that someone in the family is going to get deathly ill or something along those lines. So you have all of these cultural components around the world that infer that a flying creature is, essentially going to be a warning. But, big picture, what does the word monster mean? You guys know this one, I'm sure. Monster is derived from a Latin word that means warning, right?
Right.
So all monsters are warnings.
Very interesting conversation, Ken. And what I'd like to do right now, if we can, is kind of broaden the scope of our chat for a moment. In your latest book, A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, which I would certainly encourage everybody to get their hands on. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But in that book, you pull the curtain back on a wide array of monsters from all over. Is there a creature and or a story about that creature from your book that stands out to you that you could share with us, and perhaps one that may not be so readily known to a lot of our listeners?
Well, one that's kind of a favorite of mine is in reference to a monster that will literally make your skin crawl, or most people's skin crawl. I was contacted several years ago by a gentleman from Georgia. He works as an EMS worker and rides on fire trucks. And literally, people put their lives in his hands on a daily basis. And I interviewed this gentleman over the phone several times, and he came across as a very straightforward, no-nonsense kind of guy. But what this guy told me, and his name is Christopher Williams, is that, I think this was in 2012, he was out mowing his lawn, which is in College Park, Georgia, just outside Atlanta, and when he bumped his lawnmower into the side of a tall pine tree in his front yard, he saw something move in his peripheral vision, and when he looked up, he was horrified to see, according to him, a giant spider the size of a house cat scurrying up the tree, about 11 inches across.
Oh, my gosh.
And he immediately knew that he was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. He kind of had second thoughts about leaving the area, but he also wanted to document this thing because he didn't think anyone would ever believe that he was actually seeing it. So he finally did run into his house to grab his cell phone, and when he got back outside to where this thing was, it had disappeared, and he never, according to him, ever saw it again. So, just the thought of a giant spider, that large, most people are afraid of spiders regardless of how big they are, right? But
yeah, I'm one of those
that's
people.
That's definitely something. Yeah. So, it's definitely, you kind of got to scratch your head because Georgia is a place where you'd expect if there was an 11-inch spider running around, other people would have seen it. But this guy, just again, very sincere, very as credible as you can imagine. He had seen something that he just couldn't explain. Now, there are other accounts of giant spiders in the book from around the United States. And there are stories of giant spiders from places where you might expect them, Africa and South America and so forth. And you do actually have a species of spider in South America, the Goliath bird eater, that's about that big. But anyways, that was a pretty cool and creepy story, I thought.
It is quite unnerving. I, for one, am one that pulls out the 9mm for a common house spider. So I think I would just stop and pass out upon encountering that thing.
As well, DC has actually left vehicles that he's driving to get away from spiders. So
yeah, if the windshield wipers don't take the spider off the window and it happens to be on the inside, I'm out of the car. And that is no joke. That has happened to me twice.
Many people do. It's one of those things.
Ken, at the beginning of our conversation, I listed some of the titles of your books, and we've talked just briefly about some of the projects that you were involved in, I think. Could you go into a little bit more depth in that? I want to give you the opportunity to share with us from your own standpoint about your writings and your upcoming projects, your TV appearances, or anywhere that people can get to know you a little bit better and find out more about what you're doing. Can you share with us along those lines?
Well, thank thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, again, my new book, A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, I think is a good representation of my research through the years because it has a good diversity of subject matter. So if anyone is interested in the field of cryptozoology or in quote-unquote real-life monsters, I would encourage you to find a copy either online at Amazon or it's available at most Barnes & Noble locations in the metaphysical section. I did recently host a TV show for History Channel called Missing in Alaska. Unfortunately, it's no longer airing on History Channel, but you can find it online at historychannel.com. It may be on YouTube and other places online where video links are posted. But that was kind of a fun TV series where we went to the great state of Alaska where mysteriously many people have disappeared without a trace, and we did investigate a number of legendary creatures and other things up there, UFOs and paranormal, and a variety of fascinating topics. So I was very, very proud of that. And currently I'm doing lectures around the country. I have some events coming up later this year. I'll be speaking for Dallas Fort Worth MUFON at the end of September. If anyone's up in that area and wants to come check that out, the Mutual UFO Network. I will be speaking at the Granbury Paranormal Festival, which is also up near Fort Worth, and that'll be in the end of September as well. And then the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas, is if anyone's interested in Bigfoot or Sasquatch, it's a very well-organized, well-attended event, and you're going to have a number of lectures there pertaining to the Bigfoot Sasquatch mystery. So I'm currently working on a new book. I'm really not at liberty to discuss the subject matter as of yet, but it's a really cool, very strange, creepy, monstrous subject, and I hope you guys will have me back on at some point when that book comes out and we can talk about that a little bit more. And of course, I'm always receiving reports from people. I'm fortunate in that hopefully my public profile is to the point where people are able to reach out to me either through my website, kengerhard.com, or my Facebook page, which is Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. And if anyone out there has had a sighting or an encounter with any type of strange creature or anything that you couldn't identify, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear about it.
Ken, thank you so much for taking some time to spend with us today on the Monster Guys podcast. One of the things that we always look for is, like I said earlier, not just entertainment, but education and the opportunity to bring exceptional content to our listeners. We are kind of a fledgling podcast in the bigger picture of podcasts, but we really love what we're doing and the response we're getting from people. And I believe one of the ways that we accomplish that and we're successful with that is that we have guests who are experts in their field, who are sincere, and bring that exceptional content to the table. And you are no exception, sir. You are just, in my opinion, top shelf in this field, and I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today on the Monster Guys podcast.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your kind words and having me on. And keep up the great work. You got a great show, and we had some really engaging conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I hope to come back sometime.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Gerhard, as always, will have links in our show notes where you can find him, his websites, his Facebook, where you can get your hands on his books and some upcoming events that he's involved with. Please go check those out. Support him, and let Ken know you found out about him on the Monster Guys podcast. We'd certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Take care.
Take back every word you said, 'cause they don't make sense.
It seems to be a part of the elite club in cryptozoology. You have to have a certain kind of cowboy hat. And I see that in your pictures, and I see that with people like Lyle Blackburn. And I just want you guys to know that I have a really cool cowboy hat, too.
I've seen pictures, and yes, it is a cool. It's a rock and roll thing more than anything else, I guess. I don't know if it's always cryptozoology, but yeah.